Hi, I'm Narina Calder, and this is how my own parents broke my ribs over a piece of land and thought I'd stay quiet. They didn't know I'd wire the house. They didn't know every threat, every lie, every forged signature was already recording. 20 minutes after they screamed that I wasn't family, the cops were inside. Handcuffs, live stream rolling. But the real story, it's what they planned before that night and what they didn't see coming after. Want to know how far family betrayal can go? When I drove back into Asheville, the air felt heavier than I remembered. The sky hung low, clouds pressed together like someone trying to hide a secret. I hadn't been home in almost 8 years, not since I left for San Diego. Now, I was back because my grandfather had passed, and apparently there were family matters that needed my attention. That phrase alone told me it was going to hurt. The farmhouse stood exactly as it always had, white paint peeling, porch swing creaking in the wind, the scent of soil and pine drifting from the fields. But there was something colder now, like the house itself knew the people inside had changed. When I stepped onto the porch, the boards creaked under my boots. I could hear my mother's voice from inside, sharp, controlled, the kind that always made me straighten my spine before she even saw me. "Narina," she called from the hallway. "You're early." "I took the red eye," I said, brushing off the travel dust. "Wanted to get this over with." She didn't smile. She never really did. "Your father's in the kitchen. We'll start once everyone's here." The everyone she meant was the same small circle that had always made me feel like an outsider. My parents, my sister Indira, and the lawyer, Mr. Harlan, who used to sneak me peppermints when I was a kid. Now, even he avoided my eyes. Inside, the air smelled of coffee and varnish. The old oak table where we used to eat Sunday breakfast was now covered in neat stacks of papers and folders. The sound of the wall clock ticked too loud. When Mr. Harlan opened the sealed envelope, something in my stomach twisted. The sound of the letter opener slicing through paper was louder than it should have been. He cleared his throat, the way people do before delivering bad news. "Per the last will and testament of Jonathan Calder," he began, voice formal, careful. He paused. My eyes caught it first, a thick red line drawn across my name. Not a typo, a deliberate, heavy stroke. I blinked once, then twice. Why is my name crossed out? My mother shifted in her chair, smoothing the hem of her skirt. "Your grandfather made some adjustments before he passed. You live in California. You don't need the land." "That's not what he told me," I said, keeping my tone calm even though my pulse was climbing. "Well, not everything has to go through you, sweetheart," she said, smiling without warmth. Mr. Harlan coughed softly. "Mrs. Calder, the change was recent, only 2 weeks before his passing. There's no written explanation. My father, Callista, didn't look at me. It's done. Let's not make this dramatic." There it was, the word dramatic. The word they always used when I asked questions that made them uncomfortable. I sat still, gripping the edge of the table, forcing myself not to show anything. After the meeting, I stayed silent. I didn't argue, didn't accuse. I just nodded and left. But my mind was moving faster than my footsteps. Something wasn't right. The next morning, I walked the property alone. The sun was sharp, the air thick with humidity. That's when I saw them, small orange flags sticking up from the ground near the eastern fence. Survey markers. My chest tightened. A few steps later, I ran into old Mr. Riley, our neighbor who always carried a thermos of sweet tea. "Heard your daddy's selling off a couple of acres," he said casually. "Developers from Raleigh, I think. Surprised you're letting go of the family land." I forced a smile. "Yeah, me too." As soon as he left, I pulled out my phone and searched the county property records. There it was, clear as day, 2 parcels of Calder farmland listed under negotiation. Seller, Callista Calder. No mention of me anywhere. I felt heat rise behind my eyes. Betrayal burns in a way you can't describe, quiet, clean, but deep. It was never just about the land. It was the confirmation that I was never really one of them. That evening, I drove into town, parked near the courthouse, and sat there in silence for almost an hour. The courthouse clock chimed 7. I didn't cry. I don't do that anymore. Instead, I walked to the records office and printed copies of the listings. My fingers didn't shake as much as I thought they would. When I got back to the farmhouse, the porch light was off. The house looked like a photograph from another life, familiar and wrong at the same time. Inside, the sound of the TV came from the living room. My parents laughed softly at some sitcom. Indira was scrolling on her phone, perfectly indifferent. I stood there for a moment, watching them, wondering how many years I'd wasted trying to be seen by people who only looked through me. "Everything all right?" my mother asked without turning her head. "Fine," I said. "Just tired. Long flights do that." Her tone was clipped efficient. I went upstairs, closing my door quietly. The faint smell of my grandfather's pipe tobacco still lingered in the wood panels. It made my throat tighten. I sat on the edge of the bed and remembered something he once told me when I was 12 and crying over a broken school project. Sometimes they'll write you out, but truth leaves fingerprints. The next day, the house buzzed with false calm. My parents acted as if nothing was wrong. I moved through the rooms, slowly, pretending to look for old photo albums. The family portraits lined the hall, every one perfectly posed. I ran my hand over the frame of the biggest one. All of us smiling, sunlight behind us, lies frozen in time. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the look on my father's face when I asked about the will. Cold, final, proud. I realized it wasn't just greed, it was about control. It always had been. Sometime after midnight, I went downstairs. The house was dark, except for the faint blue light from the TV reflection in the window. I stood in front of that same family photo, the one where we looked happy. My hand went into my jacket pocket, and I felt the small velvet pouch I'd brought from California. Inside was a micro camera, something I used for property inspections in my old job. A tool meant for safety, not secrets. But tonight, it felt like armor. I turned it on, the tiny red light blinking once, then steady. I placed it behind the photo frame, adjusting it just enough so the lens had a clear view of the living room. My reflection looked back at me in the glass. Tired, yes, but steady. I whispered under my breath, "If they want a war, I'll give them the truth first." Then I straightened the frame, turned off the lamp, and climbed the stairs. Every creak in the wood felt louder than before, but my heartbeat was calm. I didn't feel guilt. I felt something cleaner, resolve. Because maybe you can't win against people like them by yelling louder. Maybe the only way to win is to let the truth speak for you. That first night after I installed the camera, I barely slept. Every sound in that house carried weight. The hum of the fridge, the creak of the stairs, even the wind through the screens. It felt like the walls themselves were holding their breath. When morning came, sunlight sliced through the blinds like interrogation lights. My phone buzzed with a message from my mother. Church at 10. We're something decent. I hadn't planned on going, but I knew if I didn't, it would only give them another reason to call me the problem child. So I went. The church smelled like lemon polish and old hymn books. Faces I hadn't seen in years turned to me with polite surprise, then quickly looked away. I slid into the pew beside my parents, who sat as if carved from stone. The pastor's words floated past me, something about grace, forgiveness, and family. My mother nodded along to every word, and I wondered how many people believed she was the saint she pretended to be. After the service, everyone gathered in the fellowship hall for coffee and pastries. My mother was in her element, laughing too loudly, touching arms, playing her part as the loving matriarch. I was halfway through a cup of weak coffee when she raised her glass and said, "To children who stay close to home and remember their roots." The room went still for half a second. Then came a wave of murmurs, polite chuckles, and nods. My chest tightened. She never looked at me directly, but every word was aimed like a dart. One of the neighbors, Mrs. Hargrove, turned to me with a sympathetic smile that didn't reach her eyes. "We all thought you'd be here more, dear. Your grandfather adored you. It must have been hard for him, you being so far away." Before I could answer, my father's voice cut through, low and certain. "Ungrateful. That's the word you're looking for." The laughter that followed was soft but sharp enough to sting. I swallowed hard, set my cup down, and smiled, tight, polite, the kind of smile you use when you're trying not to scream. "I'm glad you all care so much," I said evenly. "I'm sure Grandpa would have loved to see how united everyone is." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. My mother's face froze, just for a second, before she smoothed it over with another hostess smile. We drove home without speaking. The hum of the car engine was the only sound between us. My father's knuckles were white on the steering wheel. When we pulled into the driveway, he said, "You embarrassed your mother." I turned toward him. No, she embarrassed herself. I just didn't let her get away with it. He didn't answer, just stared straight ahead. That evening, after dinner, I found Indira in her old bedroom. It looked exactly like a magazine spread. Everything pristine, soft lighting, her framed degrees hanging neatly above the dresser. She was on her laptop, typing something important enough not to look up when I entered. "Did you hear what happened this morning?" I asked. "I heard," she said without emotion. "Mom told me." "Then you know what she said?" Indira finally looked up, her expression calm, practiced. "You could have just let it go, Neri. You know how she gets." "I'm tired of letting it go." "I didn't deserve that." "She didn't mean it like that." "Yes, she did," I said. "And you know it." Indira sighed and closed her laptop. "Look, they only want what's fair. You've been gone for years. You have your own life now. The land means more to them than it does to you." I felt the floor tilt under me. "Fair? You think it's fair to erase me from his will? To sell off what he built?" Her tone softened, but her words didn't. "If it really matters to you, sign over your part and walk away proud. Why fight over something that's already poisoned?" That's when I realized I was alone in this. Truly alone. Even my sister, the one I used to defend, had picked her side. Later that week, my mother announced a family dinner. She called it a peace offering, which in our house meant something else entirely. I helped set the table out of habit. When everyone sat down, the conversation stayed surface level for a while. Then Valora disappeared into the living room and came back holding old photo albums. She laid them open on the table like evidence. "Remember this?" she said, pointing at pictures of Indira's high school graduation. "Your sister always made us proud. Always dependable." Her finger moved to another photo, me, maybe 8 years old, standing in the corner of a family picnic, barely visible. "And you, always the quiet one. Quiet doesn't mean forgotten, unless you choose to be." The fork slipped from my hand and clattered onto the plate. "Why bring this up now?" "We're reminiscing," she said sweetly. "No," I said. "You're rewriting." My father's chair scraped against the floor. "Watch your tone." "I'm watching everything," I said, my voice calm but sharp. "Especially the parts that don't add up." He slammed his fist on the table. "You don't question us in our house." Something in me snapped. Not loudly, not violently, but with the precision of a thread breaking. I stood, leaving my food untouched. "Then maybe it's time I stopped calling it home." No one stopped me as I walked out. The air outside felt cleaner, though colder. The sun had dipped below the trees, painting the sky in streaks of orange and gray. I didn't take the car right away. I just stood there, listening to the cicadas, trying to breathe through the ache. Eventually I drove. Not anywhere in particular, just away. The roads twisted through fields and open stretches of farmland. I rolled down the window and let the wind hit my face. The radio played an old country song about broken families and unfinished business, and it almost made me laugh. I ended up at the county overlook, the one Grandpa used to take me to when I was little. The valley below was dark except for a few porch lights flickering like fireflies. I sat there for a long time, my hand still gripping the steering wheel even though the engine was off. The words from Indira echoed in my head. Sign over your part, walk away proud. I realized pride was all they thought I had left. They'd taken everything else. My place in the family, my voice, my peace. But pride? That was mine. I thought back to those nights when I was 10, building school projects alone while Indira got all the praise. She'd be in the living room, showing off some art project, while I was in the kitchen gluing cardboard towers that no one ever looked at. Grandpa was the only one who noticed. "You don't need applause," he told me once. "Just make it solid enough to stand." That's what I was doing now, building something solid, even if it was invisible. I opened the camera app on my phone. The feed came up instantly, grainy but clear enough. I could see my parents in the living room, the same frame where I'd hidden the camera behind the photo. My mother was holding a stack of papers, feeding them into the shredder. My breath caught. I zoomed in. The pages were stamped with something official. Estate documents. My name was on one of them, half visible before it disappeared into the blades. I didn't cry. I didn't gasp. I just sat there, letting the fury settle into something steady. If they wanted to erase me, they should have done it quietly. Because now, I was recording everything. The next morning started with a kind of silence that burns. I woke to the smell of burnt toast and the low hum of the refrigerator, the kind of morning noise that used to mean comfort when I was little. But now it was different. The breakfast on the counter, eggs, bacon, and biscuits, was already cold. My parents had eaten without me. I poured myself some coffee, the bitter kind that leaves a metallic taste, and sat down at the table. My father was at the sink, rinsing a glass, not looking at me. My mother came in a moment later, holding a folder in her hand. I didn't need to ask what it was. I already knew. "Good morning," I said softly, testing the air. But Laura didn't respond. She set the folder down in front of me. "We need to finish something," she said. Her voice was calm, rehearsed, like she was talking to a stranger about business. I opened the folder. Inside was a typed document, Property Adjustment Agreement. My name appeared at the top, underlined. The rest of the page was legal jargon, but I understood enough to see what it meant. If I signed it, I was giving up every right to the farm. My father's tone was measured, like he was explaining a routine decision. "It's just a formality. You don't live here anymore, Narina. It's cleaner this way." I closed the folder. "No." Laura blinked, feigning surprise. "Excuse me. I'm not signing anything," I said. My voice stayed steady, but I could feel the tremor under it. "I have legal ownership. Grandpa made sure of that." Her mouth tightened. "And look where that's gotten you. This family is breaking apart because of your pride. Because of your lies," I corrected. Callista turned from the sink. His eyes were tired but sharp. "You want to act like you're not our daughter? Fine. We'll treat you like a stranger." That word, stranger, hit harder than I expected. I stood, sliding the folder back across the table. "Then start by not asking me to sign your lies." I walked out of the kitchen, expecting silence behind me, but instead, my father's voice followed, low and dangerous. "You're not leaving this unfinished." I didn't answer. My hand was on the banister when I heard the chair scrape back violently. Then came footsteps. He caught my arm before I reached the top of the stairs. His grip was tighter than I remembered he was capable of. "You'll do the right thing," he said through his teeth. "Let me go." Laura appeared in the doorway, her expression unreadable. "Don't make this harder, Narina." I twisted, trying to free myself. "You've already made it impossible." When I tried to pull away again, he yanked harder. I stumbled backward, hitting the edge of the hallway table. Something cracked, not wood. My ribs lit up with pain so sharp it made the world go white. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. I dropped to the floor, the air rushing out of me in a soundless gasp. Laura didn't move to help me. She just crossed her arms. "Stop pretending you're fragile. You've always been dramatic." I pressed a hand to my side, the pain radiating through every nerve. My father took a step back, as if realizing what had happened, but he said nothing. No apology, no shock, just silence. I rolled onto my stomach and pushed myself up with trembling arms. The floorboards blurred beneath me. Every breath was a knife. "Don't you dare walk away from us," my mother hissed. I didn't answer. I couldn't. I crawled toward the hallway, each inch a small victory. The old carpet scratched my palms. My vision tunneled, dark at the edges. When I reached my bedroom, I slammed the door and turned the lock with shaking fingers. Leaning against the wall, I slid to the floor. My chest throbbed with every breath. I fumbled for my phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up too bright, and I winced. My hands moved on autopilot. I opened the camera app, the one linked to the device hidden behind the family photo downstairs. The footage loaded slowly, but when it did, I saw it all. My father's hand gripping my arm, my fall, the way my mother just watched. I pressed Save to Cloud. Then I backed it up to another account. Twice. My thumb hovered over the message screen. I typed out a text to an old friend from college, someone who used to say, "If you ever need a place to crash, you know where to find me." I wrote, "Hey, it's Neri. Might need that couch soon." Then I deleted it before hitting send. I lay there for a few minutes, counting the seconds between breaths, waiting for the pain to dull enough to move again. When I finally stood, every step felt like walking through water. "This is the last time you touch me," I whispered, though there was no one to hear it but the walls. It took everything I had to get to my car. The keys felt too heavy in my hand, but I made it out of the house. My parents didn't follow. Maybe they thought I was bluffing. Maybe they just didn't care. The drive to the hospital blurred into streaks of trees and asphalt. Every bump in the road sent pain shooting through my side. I gripped the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The radio was off. I needed silence, something I could control. When I pulled into the emergency room parking lot, the sky was the color of steel. The nurse at the front desk glanced at me, then at the way I held my side. "What happened?" "Fell," I said. "Off the stairs." It was only half a lie. They moved quickly. X-rays and 4 questions. The doctor, a tall man with kind eyes, said, "2 fractures, maybe 3. You'll need rest. Pain meds, gentle movement. No heavy lifting." He hesitated before asking, "Are you safe at home?" I met his gaze for half a second before looking away. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I'm fine." He nodded, but I could tell he didn't believe me. A nurse helped me sit up, handed me a small prescription bag, and gave me that look people give when they want to help but know they can't fix it. "You sure you don't want to call someone?" she asked softly. "No," I said. "I just need to get home. Back to that house." "Just home," I repeated. It was dark by the time I stepped back outside. The parking lot was almost empty, the yellow lights buzzing faintly overhead. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, hands gripping the steering wheel, forehead resting against it. The painkillers had started to dull the sharp edges, but my ribs still throbbed with every breath. I thought of Grandpa again, his voice steady and low. Truth leaves fingerprints. He was right. And now, I had proof burned into digital memory. I opened my phone's voice recorder. My reflection in the screen looked like someone I didn't recognize, pale, hollow-eyed, but awake in a way I hadn't been in years. I hit record. "I'm done being quiet," I said. My voice cracked once, then steadied. "You can take everything else, but not the truth. From now on, you're on the record." I stopped recording, saved the file, and looked out across the empty lot. The night air was cold but clean. For the first time in years, I didn't feel trapped. I felt certain. They thought they broke me. They didn't realize they'd just given me the evidence I needed to end them. I returned to the farmhouse that afternoon with my ribs wrapped tightly and my expression set like stone. I told myself again that this was just a business meeting. No emotion, no confrontation. My father parked his truck in the shade of the old maple tree, and I climbed out, laptop bag slung over my shoulder. Sunlight filtered through the leaves, casting shadow patterns on the gravel drive, and for a moment I hesitated, remembering how I used to race my sister across that yard when we were kids. Then I reminded myself, that childhood is over. My mother greeted me at the porch, arms folded. "Glad you made it," she said, the words polite but brittle. The inside of the house felt cooler than it used to, like the thermostat had been turned down as a test. My father didn't say a word. He just nodded and walked past me into the kitchen. I followed him, trying to ignore the pain in my side, the dull throb that reminded me of everything I'd been forced to bear. Over biscuits and weak coffee, my father cleared his throat. "We need to tidy up a few loose ends," he said, placing a folder on the table. The folder was thick, stamped confidential, Calder Estate. He eyed me. "Your sister is cooperating fully. It's only fair that we all move forward." I picked up the folder. It felt wrong in my hand, too familiar and yet foreign. I opened it just enough to glimpse a map of the land, new property lines drawn in red. I looked at him calmly. "I want full transparency. I expect copies of everything you're going to sign." My father's lips curled. "You're making this personal, Narana." "Family isn't just biology," I replied quietly. "It's action." My mother interrupted. "We're only doing what we need to protect what Grandpa built." "But not me," I asked. "What about what I built with him, what I believed in?" I kept my voice composed. My ribs hurt with each breath, but I ignored it. The folder slid back across the wood. "I'm not doing this unless we all know what's going on." My father slammed his palm on the table. "You're in California. You moved away. That changes things." Then I heard it, just at the edge of hearing, but enough. The soft click of the hidden camera activating downstairs. I didn't look at them. I looked at the maple tree outside our window. I locked eyes with one of its knotted branches and thought, I am done being fooled. I'll give you my answer soon, I said. But not here, this conversation isn't sufficient. I rose and walked toward the stairs. My mother called after me with the sweet tone of a sugar-coated warning. You're going to regret this. I didn't answer. I walked with steady steps, the pain slow but consistent. A few hours later, there were tasks to do, moving boxes upstairs, sorting old files, checking cracked window frames. I used the movement to distract myself from the ache. By dusk the house was silent again, except for the humming of the furnace kicking on. Shadows began pooling in corners. I slipped downstairs, retrieved a laptop from the guest bedroom drawer, and set it up in the dining room. The camera feed flickered momentarily, then settled. I had a list of rooms: living room, dining area, hallway near my mother's old study. Each device was connected to a secure archive site used for whistleblower uploads. I typed login credentials from memory. Just like old times, Nary, I whispered, thinking of my one summer job in human resources compliance. I enabled hidden live stream mode, but set it to private for now. This wasn't about publicity. It was about evidence and control. The night dinner came, and I sat at the head of the table, unplanned, unnoticed, but symbolic. My mother opened the meeting with her usual bright greeting, scanning the table as if she were auditioning. She placed her napkin on her lap. My father tucked his folded hands under his chin, looking tired yet sharp. My sister arrived late. Indira's entrance always felt like an announcement. She looked polished, untouchable. Valora smiled too big. Before we begin, I want you to know I've met with a buyer about the remaining acreage. Her voice did not waver. They're serious. Property near here is in demand. 5-year projection shows strong growth. A silence hovered. I raised my glass slowly. Interesting. Callista slid a folder toward me. Here's the next form. Tonight. I didn't look at it. I looked at him. Not tonight. He hissed. You'd better start making decisions, Narina. I exhaled quietly. I'm not doing this here. And if you refuse, he asked. Then I'll leave, I said. And you'll know exactly why. The statement hung like a challenge. The camera behind the corner wall absorbed it all, every angle. My mother forced a polite laugh. You're being melodramatic. I leaned back and said nothing. I didn't need to. My phone vibrated quietly on the table. It was a reminder. I'd set a timestamp earlier. This room, this moment. It was part of the record now. Later that night, I uploaded the first clip to my lawyer's private Dropbox. 45 seconds of tidy living room footage, raised voices, my father's hand slamming, echoes I could feel in my ribs. I clipped the start and end times, added metadata from the night's timestamp. Then I paused. My heart slowed, my breathing steadied. I opened a legal hotline page online and typed Emergency Injunction Elder Abuse Estate Coercion, North Carolina. I filled out a contact form, didn't give my name. Just details. I glanced at the footage landing in the cloud. Status, uploading. 74%. Switching back, I set the live stream toggle. Auto start if motion detected with physical contact. I don't brag about how smart I was. I just did the job. Because smart is quieter than loud. Midnight came and every floorboard seemed louder. I sat on the stairs that connected the dining room to the hallway, my ribs pressed against the oak rail. I watched the camera feed from my phone screen, my parents' house viewed through a lens I placed. My reflection glowed softly in the dark screen. I whispered, let's see who they are when they think no one's watching. The lens blinked. The feed recorded. Then I stood up slowly. I moved toward the living room and switched the lamp off. The darkness filled the space. A calm filled me. The strategy was set. The line was drawn. When I leaned against the old barn door that evening, the air felt heavier than the Texas sky I once drove under. I touched the scar just under my ribs, still tender, reminding me of the night it all changed. I'd wrapped it in gauze, hidden it under a loose shirt, but it wasn't just pain I carried, it was proof. And tonight I was going to use it. Back at the farmhouse, I slipped past the living room and settled at my laptop in what used to be the sunroom. The windows faced the fields. always bathed in late-day gold this time of year. It was quiet, too quiet, so I hit the play button and watched the footage of my father's hand clench my arm the moment I hit the floor. The angle was slightly skewed, but the gasp that followed was unmistakable. The timestamp read 8:27 p.m. Outside, the crickets had started. I called my friend in Portland. He answered on the third ring. "Hey, Neri," he said. "You ready?" "More than that," I replied. "They've turned the farm into a ledger. I'm about to show everyone who's been writing the entries." In the background, I heard a door creak. My parents. I muted the phone and sat still, watching the frames of the room fill with soft dusk light. The house that once held laughter held echoes now. At 8:40 p.m., I closed the laptop and carried a tray of coffee into the kitchen. My mother was there, making herself at home in the dimmed light, wearing pearls and still that practiced softness. "Thank you for the coffee," she said, leaning on the counter. "It's good to see you're settling in." I nodded, trying to. My father entered, took the cup from her, and gave me a brief nod. "We've arranged a meeting tomorrow," he said. "One final agreement. I hope you're ready." I smiled quietly. "Yes, I've been ready for some time." They exchanged no glances. My mother's lips thinned. "We'll talk about the arrangements then." I sat down. "Sure." They left the room. Indira passed by, just a blur of perfume and heels, and didn't stop. I watched them go and felt a small part of the old me sigh. That little girl who believed family meant safety. She was gone. A half hour later, I found myself back at the laptop. I uploaded the footage to a secure server, sent access info to a lawyer friend in Chapel Hill, then cleared my browser and closed the lid. The house hummed behind me, shadows creeping across the floorboards. I sat for another hour, simply breathing, steady, controlled, while the reality settled. I wasn't a guest. I was a guardian now. The next evening arrived with calm on the surface, but inside I felt the storm's first crack. My parents assembled the dining room for the family discussion. A white tablecloth, the silver chairs, candlelight. Everything looked like an invitation to peace. My mother welcomed me with the warm tone of someone playing a part. "This family needs healing, not hatred," she said. Her pearls caught the candlelight just so. My father nodded. "You can't keep holding grudges, Narana. You were never meant to inherit alone." I listened as I'd learned to do. I watched his lips move and counted the seconds. My phone sat face down on the table, but I knew the camera behind the photo frame had it all. My sister cleared her throat. "Maybe we should all forgive and move on," Indira suggested softly. Her voice sounded distant. For the first time I spoke without anger. I already forgiven myself, but I refused to let forgiveness erase what I know. The silence that followed was thick. My father leaned in. "You're making this harder than it needs to be." I tilted my hand upward, so my wedding-style ring caught the candle flame, an old item Grandpa gave me during a summer visit. "No," I said. "You're refusing to see it's already broken." I watched his face go pale. On his phone, the screen lit up with a notification. I didn't look, but I felt it, the rhythm skip. In that moment, I said quietly, just so we're clear, "This has been live-streamed." My mother stopped her usual laughter. My father stood so fast he knocked his chair backward. "Yes, everything," I continued. "Since the bruises, since the threats, since the fake paperwork." I paused for effect. "Here's a clip." I tapped the phone on the table. The screen flickered, my father's face red, hand shoved on the table, my body on the floor the moment he said, "You're not family anymore." My sister gasped. My mother covered her mouth. My father lunged for the phone. I grabbed it first. "You think this is about land? It's about truth. And you're on record." I stood, moved toward the door. The candles were still burning. The table looked perfect and poisonous. My father's fist slammed once more on the table. "Get out of my house." I looked at him directly. "I'm already gone." I left without another word. Later that night I sat on the front steps, listening to the wind rustle through the maple tree. The lights inside flickered. My mother appeared at the window, just for a second, her face blurred by glass. I typed a message to the lawyer, "Ready when you are." As I stood, I touched the photo on the mantel, me and my grandfather, his arm around me, both of us smiling at a long-gone summer. I replaced it with a new one, me and something else, courage. I whispered into the night. The only person who never lied to me is gone. But now I'm speaking for both of us. Morning sunlight crept across the dashboard of my car as I sat parked outside the sheriff's office. My hands were steady for once, too steady. I'd spent weeks letting them shake. Not today. Today wasn't about endurance, it was about action. The air inside the car smelled faintly of antiseptic from the hospital. My ribs still ached when I breathed too deeply, but the pain no longer scared me. It kept me anchored. I unlocked my phone and opened the folder marked Proof. The thumbnail showed my father's arm reaching toward me, my mother's shadow in the background, the timestamp in the corner. I selected the file and attached it to an email addressed to Attorney Michael Brewer, Asheville Civil Defense. Subject line: Evidence of domestic and estate coercion. Then I took a long breath and hit send. I followed it with a second email, this one to an old contact from my nonprofit work, a social justice media advocate I'd met during a campaign against elder fraud. She once told me, "If you ever have a story that matters, I'll make sure people listen." My reply came quickly. "This isn't revenge," I wrote. "This is protection. I'm done being the quiet one." When I finally stepped into the sheriff's office, the cool air hit me like a reset. The deputy at the front desk looked up. "Can I help you, ma'am?" I nodded. "Yes. I need to file a report. Domestic assault, property manipulation, coercion." He handed me a clipboard. "Do you have documentation?" "Plenty," I said, handing over a USB drive. "And X-rays." The report took 2 hours. They photographed the bruising around my ribs, asked for a statement, asked again if I felt safe returning home. I told them, "I'm safer now than I've ever been." When I left, the mountains glowed orange against the afternoon light. I stopped at the diner near Main Street, ordered coffee, and opened my phone again. A message from Brewer popped up. "Receive the files. This is clear-cut abuse and coercion. Sit tight. We're placing a legal hold on the property transfer immediately." Below that, another message blinked from my media contact. "We'll schedule the clip as a case study in inheritance pressure, private until you say go public." For the first time in weeks, I smiled. Not the kind of smile people wear in pictures, but the kind that sits deep in the bones, the kind that means survival has turned into strategy. I waited in my car across the street from the farmhouse. It looked peaceful in that late afternoon way, shutters closed, wind chimes still. But I knew it wasn't peace, it was pause. Every secret in that house was about to face daylight. When the front door opened, my father's figure filled the frame. He looked older, his shoulders stiff. He walked toward the mailbox, opened it, then turned sharply toward me. He must have seen the car engine still running. His steps quickened. I rolled down the window before he could start shouting. "You've brought shame to this family!" he barked, fists clenched at his sides. "No," I said, voice calm. "You did that. I just documented it. After all we've done for you." "You mean to me," I corrected. "You've mistaken silence for agreement." He stepped closer, eyes narrowing. "You think the world will take your word over ours?" "They don't need to," I replied. "They have the footage." The color drained from his face. He glanced toward the house, toward the window where my mother stood watching. "Turn off whatever you're planning," he said through his teeth. I shook my head slowly. "You can't turn off truth, Callista." I rarely used his first name. It felt cold, surgical. "It's out there now." He reached for my car door, and for a heartbeat I thought he'd try something desperate. But across the street, Mrs. Hanley, our elderly neighbor, had stopped watering her roses. Another man paused while jogging. My father noticed them watching. "Try anything now," I said quietly but loud enough for them to hear, "and I'll hit send right here in front of everyone." The tension broke like glass. He backed away, muttering something about betrayal, about how I'd regret this. I didn't respond. I just started the engine and drove down the gravel path, dust curling behind me like smoke. By evening, I was back at the small rental apartment on the edge of town, a place that smelled of fresh paint and anonymity. I opened my laptop, refreshed my email, and saw the confirmation: property transfer frozen pending investigation. I exhaled for what felt like the first real time in years. But the knock came sooner than I expected. When I opened the door, Indira stood there. Her hair was perfect as ever, but her face wasn't. It was tired, human. "You're not wrong," she said, stepping inside before I could invite her. But I didn't think it would come to this. It was always going to come to this, I replied, motioning toward the chair. You just had the luxury to ignore it. She sat down, rubbing her hands together. They're furious. Mom's calling lawyers. Dad hasn't said a word in hours. Good, I said simply. She looked up sharply. Do you even hear yourself? You sound cold. I've been called worse, I said, smiling faintly. Cold is better than broken. We sat in silence for a long while. Then she whispered, Do you think there's still a way back from this? For what? The family. I shook my head. There's no going back to something that never existed. She looked at me then, not as a rival, but as someone who finally saw the truth. Maybe she didn't want to believe it, but she couldn't unsee it anymore. When she left, she turned at the door. I didn't help you when I should have. That's on me. I know, I said softly. Maybe someday you'll forgive yourself too. She nodded once and disappeared into the night. I stayed awake, lights low, laptop open. The cursor blinked over a message draft to my attorney. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. My phone buzzed again, a notification from the sheriff's office, case officially under review. Expect contact within 48 hours. As if on cue, headlights flared outside. The postal truck pulled up, even though it was nearly 9. I stepped out and accepted a large manila envelope. The seal read, State of North Carolina Civil Subpoena. Inside were 2 names in bold print, Callista Calder and Valora Calder. I ran my fingers over the paper. It felt heavier than justice. It felt like closure in progress. I placed it gently on the counter beside a cooling mug of tea. If justice won't start at the dinner table, I whispered, I'll bring it to court. The night outside was calm, the moon spilling silver over the parking lot. I could almost hear Grandpa's voice again. Truth leaves fingerprints, nary. Don't wipe them off. This time I didn't. I had waited a long time for this kind of stillness. The kind that comes before a storm finally breaks, when the air gets too heavy to breathe but too charged to stay still. That afternoon, I sat at my small kitchen table with a mug of black coffee cooling beside the laptop. The cursor blinked in the middle of the screen. Scheduled upload, 7 p.m. The video wasn't edited for sympathy or shock value. It was plain, uncut truth, voices raised, my father's shadow over me, my mother's words like knives hidden in honey. The timestamp ran across the bottom corner, steady as a heartbeat. I double-checked the schedule, public release at 7 on the dot. The clip was already sent to my lawyer, to the sheriff's department, and to one journalist I trusted from my nonprofit days. There would be no stopping it now. The minutes ticked by. I pulled the blinds halfway and sat in the quiet hum of the apartment, listening to my ribs ache faintly with each breath. It was almost comforting now, like an old scar teaching me to stand straighter. At 6:45, my phone rang. It was Brewer. You sure about this? He asked. I've never been surer, I said. He exhaled. Then keep your line open. I've already notified the county police. If they get a call from the farm, they'll move in fast. Good, I said. They'll have plenty to see. When I hung up, the apartment clock ticked loud enough to sound like a countdown. I stepped outside, the evening light sharp and clean, and drove back toward the farm. The long gravel road curved through the trees, the same one I used to walk with Grandpa on cool mornings. Back then, he'd talk about weather patterns and soil, how nature always tells the truth if you're patient enough to listen. Now I was the one waiting for nature to balance the scales. When the farmhouse came into view, I parked a distance away. The sky was turning orange, the light spilling through the windows like fire. I could see movement inside, my parents at the dining table, papers spread out. They were planning their next story. At 6:59, my phone buzzed once, a simple notification. Scheduled upload starting. The world didn't explode right away. It began quietly, with the sound of sirens somewhere far off, growing closer. My pulse didn't rise. I just sat there and watched the blue lights bloom over the fields. By the time I stepped out of the car, 2 sheriff's cruisers had already pulled into the driveway. My father was on the porch, shouting before they even opened their doors. "This is private property!" he yelled, the same line he'd used every time he wanted control. The lead officer replied calmly, "Sir, we have a warrant to enter." There's sufficient cause under state statute, domestic assault and estate fraud investigation. My mother appeared behind him, dressed neatly, pearls at her throat even in panic. This is absurd, she said, her voice trembling just enough to sound rehearsed. We've done nothing wrong. The officers stepped inside. My phone vibrated again, livestream triggered. I followed them through the door, camera already rolling from the corner shelf where I'd left it. The same living room, the same carpet where I'd once been gasping for air, was now filled with law enforcement and flashing lights. My father turned toward me, fury in his eyes. You did this, he said. Yes, I answered softly, and it's all being recorded again. When they read him his rights, he tried to speak over them, but the officer's voice carried stronger. Callista Calder, you are under arrest for assault and coercive manipulation of estate holdings. My mother screamed his name, tried to grab his arm, but another officer gently held her back. Valora Calder, you are being detained for conspiracy to defraud an estate. It was surreal. The cuffs clicked, metal against bone, and for the first time, his hands weren't holding me down. They were held back. Neighbors had gathered near the fence line, their whispers carried on the wind. I didn't say anything. I stood behind the camera, silent, letting the moment tell its own truth. The live stream rolled uninterrupted, reaching thousands within minutes. Comments flashed across the screen. Shock, disbelief, sympathy, but I didn't read them. This wasn't about the crowd. It was about finally being heard without having to scream. By 8:30, the cruisers were gone, taillights fading down the dirt road. The house was quiet again, but it didn't feel like home, just a hollow shell of every lie ever told inside it. I stayed on the porch, letting the night wrap around me. That's when I saw headlights coming from the main road. It was Indira's car. She stepped out still wearing her work clothes, her eyes wide, mascara streaked slightly at the corners. What happened? She asked, though she already knew. I gestured toward the house. They're gone. The truth caught up. She didn't move for a while. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded envelope. Mom wrote this, she said, handing it to me. I didn't know until tonight. It was with her documents. I unfolded the letter. My mother's handwriting, perfect cursive, careful even in cruelty. If Narina causes trouble or jeopardizes this family's public image, she forfeits her inheritance. The assets revert fully to Indira Calder. I laughed quietly at first, then almost bitterly. So you were Plan B. I was the problem they couldn't erase quietly. Indira's voice broke. I didn't know. I swear I didn't. I believe you, I said. But they did. She wiped her eyes. What now? Now. I looked at the dark windows behind us. Now we let the truth do what it's meant to. We stood there in silence. Somewhere far off, I could still hear a dog barking, a reminder that life kept moving even after everything else stopped. After she left, I went back inside. The rooms felt larger, emptier. Every picture on the wall was a version of a lie, smiling faces, forced togetherness. I took them down one by one, leaving the hooks bare. In the hallway, I paused before the photo of Grandpa. His face was calm, wise still. I touched the frame. You'd hate how far they fell, I whispered. The air felt lighter after I said it. My phone rang again. It was Brewer. The court just issued an emergency freeze on the will, he said. You've got a case, Narina. It's real now. Thank you, I said quietly, for believing me before the world did. After hanging up, I stepped outside one last time. The moon was high, silvering the porch rails. Across the valley, the lights of police cars were faint but steady. I checked my phone again. Notifications from local news outlets flooded in, screenshots of the live stream, headlines already forming. But one clip caught my eye, the moment my father was let out of the house. My face wasn't visible, but my voice was. Some things you don't forgive, I'd said. You just survive them. I didn't remember saying it, but hearing it now felt right. It wasn't anger anymore. It was clarity. The night wind carried the smell of pine and rain, the same scent that used to fill this land when I was a child. For a second, I could almost hear Grandpa's laugh again, distant but warm. I closed my eyes and whispered, "It's done." The dawn light filtered softly through the farmhouse windows, painting long stripes on the worn floorboards. Everything felt heavier now, Stillness wrapped around the rooms like a shroud. After the door shut behind them, after the sirens faded and the lenses stopped rolling, I remained in the silence. It wasn't peace, but it was mine. I had returned to the farmhouse with neither anger nor joy, just a trim sense of purpose. My ribs still throbbed, an ache I hardly noticed anymore, and each step inside the house reminded me of what this place had cost and what I intended it to become. I moved through the living room, the dining area, the old sunroom where Grandpa used to read his newspapers. Every corner held a memory. Some I shelved in boxes, others I carried inwards, stored behind my ribs. I found a stack of old photo albums in the back closet, faded edges, handwriting that trembled in ink. I opened the top one and recognized childhood laughter, sibling rivalry, summer sun, Grandpa's wide smile. Indira's face was always in the center, his arm around her. My own photo was smaller, tucked away. I closed the album gently. You don't get to pick who remembers you, but you can choose how you remember yourself. I dragged the boxes out to the porch. As noon approached, the air warmed, and I set up a sorting station under the maple tree. I labeled 3 piles: keep, sell, donate. Some items felt safe. Grandpa's old pipe stand, 2 rocking chairs I used to nap in as a girl. Others were sharp, a framed invitation to a shareholder meeting, Grandpa's name in fine print, and mine missing. That one went straight to the sell pile. If they thought they could erase me, I could erase the pieces they used to justify that erasure. By afternoon, the trucks from the resale company pulled up. Men in navy uniforms loaded crates quietly. They didn't ask questions, and I didn't volunteer answers. I poured iced tea for myself and sat on the porch railing, breathing in the modest hum of activity. The farm no longer felt like home. It felt like waiting. Later that evening, Indira arrived. She drove up the gravel lane, just as the sky streaked yellow and gray. I heard the engine, stepped away from the porch, and met her by the truck. Her face was familiar but different, paler, drained. "Neri," she said, removing her sunglasses. "I've been thinking. I had no idea how deep this went." I tilted my head. "You didn't need to fight for me. I needed you not to help them destroy me." She didn't respond immediately. She handed me a thick envelope. I found this while clearing out Mom's files. Inside I recognized the will, Grandpa's final document. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. "Mom wrote this?" I asked. She nodded. She hid it, said it was a backup, said I'd never see it unless you caused trouble. I opened the letter. My grandfather's script in his own hand. "In the event of familial coercion or violence, this estate shall pass fully to Narana Calder." It was witnessed, dated valid. I closed the envelope without emotion. So you were Plan B. I was the problem they couldn't erase, quietly. Indira's eyes filled. "I didn't know." "I believe you," I said. "But they did." She left soon after. I walked back inside with the envelope. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet you only notice when your pulse slows. I sat at the kitchen table, placed the folder beside the mug of tea, and waited. Next morning I drove to the attorney's office, the air crisp in my lungs. The will was filed for review. I sat in the waiting room listening to the rain tap against the windows while the clerk handled it. When I received the call, will clause confirmed. Estate rights revert. I felt something like a breath I hadn't exhaled in years. I didn't celebrate. I laid the call down and stepped outside. The rain had washed the fields green against the gray sky. On the ride back, I reflected, this wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming a part of identity, a part of legacy, a part of truth. Back at the porch, the sun broke through the gray, casting light on the rocking chair Grandpa used to sit in. I sat down, placed my hand on the wood. My ribs ached still, but I let the breeze carry it. The farm wasn't mine yet, not fully, but the path to it was clear. Emails came in next day. Neighbors I hadn't heard from in years reached out. I saw the video. "I'm sorry." I forwarded each message to a folder called support. I declined interviews. I didn't need the spotlight. The truth was never for fame. I told a local reporter via message. Just for freedom. One night I sat on the porch long after the fireflies had left. I looked at the dark windows of the farmhouse and said aloud, "I'm not broken. I'm becoming what I should have been all along." The ache in my ribs was still there, a quiet companion. And in the light of dawn, I pulled open the barn doors. Sunlight flooded the space, a wide, empty canvas of plank and nail. I grabbed a brush and began repainting the wood, first a coat of white, then a soft sage, colors Grandpa loved. I thought, you don't rebuild with revenge. You rebuild with what they couldn't take. It didn't end when they left. It ended when I decided not to carry it anymore. Those words echoed in my head as I walked into the courthouse that morning. The smell of polished wood, the quiet hum of whispered conversations, the shuffle of papers, it all felt sterile, distant. Yet this was the place where years of silence, fear, and betrayal would finally close their ledger. The courtroom was half full, reporters were banned, but curiosity lingered. A few familiar faces from town sat in the back, pretending not to look at me. Across the aisle, my parents sat beside their attorneys, avoiding my eyes. Valora wore the same pearl necklace she always clung to in moments of control. Callista looked older, shrunken somehow. They whispered to their lawyers, eyes fixed forward. When the clerk called the case, the sound of my name, Narina Calder, rang through the room like a church bell. I rose and walked to the table. My lawyer, Brewer, gave me a reassuring nod. I didn't feel victorious, just steady. The proceedings began with brief summaries. The footage, the medical records, the statements, each item recited like lines from someone else's story. The judge's voice was calm, procedural. My parents' attorneys argued mitigation, that stress and misunderstanding led to the altercation, that no harm was intended. When it was my turn, I didn't deliver a speech. I simply said, I came here to confirm what's already true. I'm not here for vengeance. I'm here so that it stops. The judge looked at me for a long moment before speaking. This court recognizes the evidence presented. The estate's coercion clause stands. Effective immediately, all rights revert to Narina Calder. No restitution will be ordered, given existing property division. The gavel struck. One sound, final and clean. My parents didn't turn around. Indira, seated quietly behind them, met my gaze. She gave a faint nod, an apology without words. I didn't cry. I just breathed. For the first time, deeply. Outside the courthouse, the early afternoon sun was warm on my shoulders. Brewer handed me the signed documents, and I thanked him. It's done, he said. No, Irapelia. It's settled. That's not the same thing. He smiled softly. Maybe that's what healing looks like. As I drove back through town, everything felt both familiar and foreign. The grocery store, the post office, the old diner where Grandpa used to buy me pie, it all looked unchanged, yet I wasn't the same person seeing it. At the market, I stopped for a few groceries. When I reached for a basket, a woman near the produce section looked up. Mrs. Hanley, the neighbor who'd once watched from across the street. She gave a small nod. You were brave, she said quietly. We saw the clip. I'm sorry. Her words took me off guard. I managed a faint smile. Thank you. I guess I just did what needed doing. A man at the register offered to carry my bags to the car. I declined politely. On the drive home, I rolled down the window and let the mountain air rush through. It smelled of pine and late spring rain, the same scent that used to mean safety. Days passed. The story left the news cycle. Reporters moved on. The house felt different now. No echoes of shouting, no dread in the hallways. But silence can be its own challenge. Healing doesn't arrive with fanfare. It creeps in quietly, testing if you'll allow it to stay. At my therapist's office, sunlight spilled through a narrow window. I sat on the couch, hands loosely clasped. It took me months to say the words aloud. It wasn't just the ribs, I said softly. It was realizing I was never safe in that house. Not even as a child. My therapist nodded gently. And what do you want now, Narina? Peace, I said after a pause. Not forgiveness, not revenge. Just peace. Later that night, I sat by the fireplace with a letter I'd written to Grandpa. The paper trembled slightly in my hands. I did what you would have wanted, I wrote. You told me truth leaves fingerprints. I left mine on every step of this fight. And I'm still here. I folded it, set it in a small metal bowl, and lit a match. The flame curled around the paper, slow and deliberate, until the ashes turned soft and gray. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like something was burning me. I felt like something was releasing me. Weeks drifted by. I stayed busy, clearing the fields, repainting the fences, patching the barn roof. The work was simple and honest. Some mornings, I'd find Indira sitting in her car at the end of the driveway. She never came up, and I never waved. Maybe someday we would meet in the middle, but not yet. When spring began to break fully, I planted a small garden near the porch. Tomatoes, herbs, sunflowers. Grandpa always said gardens teach you patience, that tending something living is the purest form of prayer. My hands still bore scars from the past months, but digging into the soil felt good. Grounding. One afternoon, I stood outside the repainted barn, brush in hand, touching up the new sage green panels. I carved my initials, NC, into the doorway beam. Not as a claim of ownership, but as a quiet affirmation, I was still here. The world hadn't taken that from me. The townspeople began inviting me to speak at community centers, mostly older folks looking for advice on wills and inheritance disputes. I taught them what I learned the hardest way possible. Document everything. Don't let fear write your silence for you. They listened, some with tears, some with quiet nods. Each evening, I'd return home, make tea, and sit on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. The house creaked as it cooled, a sound that used to unsettle me but now felt alive. The land stretched out before me, unclaimed by anything except time. Justice hadn't fixed the past, it couldn't. It didn't erase the nights I hid in my room, or the moment pain bloomed through my chest. But it protected what came after. It gave me space to breathe, to plant, to start again. On the last night before summer, I stood in the doorway of the barn, watching the fireflies pulse over the field. Their small lights flickered in rhythm, a quiet proof that life insists on continuing. I whispered to no one in particular, "I own all of me now." And for the first time, the echo that answered back wasn't pain. It was peace. What this story reminds us is that silence can feel like safety, but it's often just a delay in the storm. When families become battlegrounds, truth can be your only shield. Have you ever stayed silent just to keep the peace, and later realized the cost was too high? Let me know your thoughts in the comments,